In our Bible class, we talked about some Bible study hints and helps. And one of the things we talked about was learning to study in context. And one of the points that we made about studying in context is that oftentimes you have to have, I call it a view from 10,000 feet, a big picture view before you start looking at the little picture view. One of the illustrations we used this morning is that you can walk up a creek and explore all the holes in it, or you can walk up the creek stepping on the rocks. I like to make sure I know where all the rocks are before I start dropping off in the holes. And so Luke 15 is one of those chapters that I'm afraid gets segmented, and there's nothing wrong with studying it individually, but it gets segmented to the point that we miss a really, really big picture. I know as a little boy we would go to a gospel meeting, and Sunday morning would have the services, and then Monday night the preacher would preach on the lost sheep. And then Tuesday night, the preacher would preach on the lost coin. And then Wednesday night, the preacher would preach on the lost boy. You been to one of those meetings? This means yes in Alabama. This means no. This means you're not voting. All right. So, but when you read this without the divider that the translators put in for the thought, you get a little bit of a bigger picture. So Luke chapter 15. Then all the tax collectors and sinners drew near to him to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes complained, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." And so he spoke a parable to them. So you've got Jesus, who is, for all practical purposes, a traveling rabbi, although he's not from any of the rabbinical schools. He's what we would call a traveling country preacher. And he's in an area, and a large crowd is drawn together, and he decides to sit down and eat with these folks. Anthropologically and sociologically speaking, when you eat a meal with someone, that is as intimate as you can be without touching them. That's why it's so awkward to eat with a girl on a date, because you don't know what to do. All right? And you're starving to death. You've worked all day, and you order 3 Big Macs, 2 orders of fries, and a milkshake. She says, "I'll have a salad." And then it's like, and you feel like a barbarian. But Jesus is sitting down in close company with these folks. Now, he's got, part of the folks in his audience are not participants, they're observers. You got a group of people known as the Pharisees and a group of people known as the scribes. The Jewish religion basically had 4 major components: Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots. The Pharisees were the top tier, elite of the elites. They were the strictest, most conservative. The only people in the New Testament who were more morally strict than the Pharisees were actually the Samaritans. And most people don't know that because the Pharisees gave the Samaritans such bad press. And then you had a group of people known as the scribes. And the scribes were the people who were in charge of literally transcribing the scriptures. They didn't have a printing press. You couldn't take a screenshot on your phone. You couldn't get in an email document. If you had a copy of the scriptures, somebody had to copy it down. And the idea of meticulously copying down word for word the word of God was a very serious job. God actually required that of all his kings. He told Moses, when you have a king and he sits on my throne, he will write for himself a copy of this law. Sit down and write word for word what I told Moses. So the scribes were the guys who were trained. So if you spend every day of your life copying the letters, copying the words, you think you'd be an expert in this stuff? Yeah. So you got the Pharisees, super, super strict. Then you got the scribes who are super knowledgeable of what's in the Word. And they're looking at Jesus, and he's eating. He's sitting in an intimate social situation, and he's eating with sinners and tax collectors. Now, I think that's interesting that if a tax collector is also a sinner, why he gets its own special category. If I were to do that, it would be tax collectors, sinners, and physical therapists. It's who I would put in that line if you ever had surgery and had anybody work on you after the surgery. The tax collectors were, what had happened when the Romans came in, people in Palestine spoke Aramaic. Now, your Bible is written in Koine Greek, but the day-to-day conversations between people was in a language called Aramaic. when Paul gets arrested in Jerusalem and they start to take him into the barracks to interrogate him, he asks the soldier, "Can I speak to you?" And the soldier says, "You speak Greek?" Meaning he's surprised that this Jew can communicate with him. And he says, "Yeah, I speak Greek. Let me speak to the people." "Sure, you can speak to the people." Well, when Paul turns and speaks to the people, he speaks in Aramaic. And this Roman soldier doesn't understand it. So that when Paul gets to, "I'm here because of the resurrection of the dead," and they start throwing dirt in the air, this Roman soldier feels like he's been played. So a lot of times we don't understand that they were speaking in a different language. And I'm going to chase a rabbit real quick. I know you've had guys come in and say, "Hey, there's these 4 or 5 different Greek words for love." And so Jesus is walking on the beach with Peter in John 21, and he says, "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." And he uses different Greek words. That conversation didn't take place in Greek. It took place in Aramaic. There's no doctrinal significance to the difference in those words. John uses those words interchangeably. John will say, "I'm the apostle Jesus loved, agapao." John will say, "I'm the apostle Jesus loved, phileo." And John just uses those words because an Aramaic speaker writing those words in Greek, he didn't care about the subtleties of them. So, Greek is a good language for nuance, but it's not technically specific like you think about other languages. So the Romans come in and they take over. Well, if I'm a conquering military power and I'm going to take over, I'm going to collect taxes from you. Now, what's the problem of collecting taxes from people who don't speak the same language as you? You ever been to Mexico or Honduras and tried to buy anything anywhere? Didn't know the language? I was riding with Dave Baggett one night, and we pull some guys out of a car. 5 guys in a car. We get them out, roll them out. No habla, no habla. They don't speak any English. Dave looks at me and said, "I'm going to arrest the one in red sneakers now." I look down, and they spoke English. They spoke English. Anyway, so you get to this place, and the Roman soldier comes, knocks on your door and says, "Hey, I need some taxes." "I'm sorry, don't speak Roman. Don't speak Latin. Can't help you." So the Romans would go, "Hey, Troy, you know the people in this valley, right? You speak their language, don't you? I want you to be my guy to go collect taxes from them because y'all speak the same language." Troy thinks, how hard can that be? And by the way, I don't care how much you collect. I want $20 a person for everybody in this room. But if you get $100 a person and just give me 20, I'm cool with that. So now Troy's got the ability to walk to your house, and he grew up around here, and say, "Hey, I need this money from," "Well, how much money?" "Well, I need $175 from you." "Well, why is it that much?" "I don't like you." "Well, I'm not going to give it to you. You see these 2 boys here wearing armor with the swords and the spears? They beat the $175 out of you, I promise you." And all of a sudden, these guys had the backing of the military. They could do anything personal they wanted to with your tax bill and keep all the money that Rome didn't want. Now, you'd be a rich man, but would you be popular? Don't eat no pies nobody brings you to church. I'm just saying right now. And so that's why they view these guys as sinners. Because here these people are, they're turncoats and they're traitors, and they're collecting money from their own people to give these pagan worshiping Romans. And not only that, they're cheaters. And Jesus is eating dinner with them. He's at a table, he's not only eating with sinners, but he's eating with tax collectors. These scribes and these Pharisees, these religious people, look at these other folks and they say they have no value. And in response to that heart condition, in response to these thoughts that these people are having, Jesus is going to tell some stories, parables. The Greek word parable, parabales, means to throw something beside something and compare them. That's what the word means. So Jesus is going, but now we've read this and we take it as a dissertation. This is how you should respond to a lost sheep. This is how you respond to a lost coin. I've heard people preach, this is looking for people outside the church, looking for lost people inside the church. That's not what's happening here. Jesus is going to ask 2 rhetorical questions. And then he's going to make an emphatic statement. This man, he was centered. I can't believe this. So he spoke this parable unto them. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, and he says to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. I tell you, likewise, they'll be rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 people who don't need repentance. He's not saying that God doesn't value saved people. What he says is, okay, you're mad because I'm eating with these people. Well, let me ask you a question. Which one of you? He's not saying this is what I would do. He's not saying this is what I should do. He says, which one of you, if you lost a sheep, you have 100 sheep, and you head count, I'm missing a sheep, leave 99 to go look for one. He's making them confront the value that they place on animals. Now, I'm not a farmer, I don't have livestock. But I've crawled around in those woods looking for them deer. You put a 120 grain broadhead through a big old buck, and you start following that blood trail, and you'll crawl through some nasty stuff looking for that whole deer, won't you? You've seen a sign on the missing lost dog, missing lost cat. My brother and I were coming back from hunting one time and going by this little white church building on Gurley Pike, old abandoned building. It was there before the Maysville congregation was ever there. And I saw something move under it. We wheeled off the road, and I got down on my hands and knees to look under this little building, and it's full of little bitty tiny kittens. Went back to the house, got a good pair of gloves and a can of tuna. Opened that tuna can up, lured one of those little cats up around there and snatched it. A little calico colored cat, took it home. Much to the joy of my daughter, much to the consternation of my wife. But we had a little cat that my daughter named Oxford. And so we built him a little bed and everything. I get up the next morning, me and my brother go hunting. I climb a tree. I'm sitting in a tree, my phone wiggles. And I've told my family, if I'm hunting, if something needs to be burning or somebody needs to be bleeding, don't call me while I'm in the woods. My phone wiggles. I pull my phone out. What? Dad, I got up this morning. And at the end of the street, there's a sign that says, lost kitten, reward $500. What should I do? I said, go catch all the kittens. This lady that lived up on the pasture here, her daughter had found these kittens, and instead of taking them home and having their shots done, she was just going across the pasture every day feeding these little kittens. And she got down there that morning, was missing a cat, and put a sign on the post that I'll give you $500 for my cat. That's the value we place on animals, right? Jesus says, oh, so you don't like the fact that I'm eating with these lost people. But if you had a lost animal, you'd leave 99 of them to go look for that one. That's the value you place on a lost animal. Second story. Or, this is verse 8. Notice that verse 4 starts with, what man of you? Now look at verse 8. What woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls her friends and her neighbors together, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I lost. Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in heaven of the presence of angels of God over one sinner who repents. So he's talked about this is the value you place on livestock, talks to the men. Now he's talking to the ladies. Which one of you ladies, if you had a box, and what's happening with this box is a girl getting ready to get married would collect coins to make a bracelet that she would wear at her wedding. Have you noticed how your daughters plan their weddings before they're old enough to date? They know what the colors are going to be and what music's going to play, and they pretend to get married before they have boyfriends. I asked my daughter, what are you going to do? Just plug and play some poor? Yeah. And that's what poor Tyler did. He just stood there where he's supposed to stand. Well, she's collecting these silver coins, and so she gets them out, and she's looking through her treasures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And she's missing one. And she sweeps her house. Now, when these people swept their houses, they didn't have hardwood floors, laminate, or carpet. This is a dirt floor house. She's seriously sweeping. And she didn't have electric lights. She has to light a lamp, light a candle. And she tears this house apart looking for this one little thing that she lost. Hey, this is the value you people place on an animal. This is the value you people place on a thing. And I can start talking about things. You ever notice that your dad loses the remote control? What happens when dad loses the remote control? He starts searching. He'll walk 10 miles looking for a remote control, when you could just step across and change the channel. But no, he's going to lap that house. And at some point, what happens? Someone has stolen the remote. Yeah, a burglar came in under the cover of darkness, left the plasma TV, left the laptop, left the iPad. What'd they do? They stole the $10 remote. That makes a lot of sense. Nobody stole the remote. But what happens if somebody loses a contact lens? When I was a younger preacher and would give this lesson before I wore reading glasses, I would pretend to sneeze and pretend to lose a contact I don't wear. And get on my knees, and men in their Sunday best would get on their knees and look for a contact lens. I've seen a high school basketball championship come to a grinding halt. One of those young men said, hey ref, I lost a contact. And shut the whole thing down until they found that contact. Let one of these teenage girls lose that cell phone. Call the FBI. I can't find my cell phone. Now you know what it is to lose stuff. Jesus says, oh, so I'm eating with people who are lost. And you don't like it. They have no value to you. Where's the value you place on a lost animal? And this is the value you place on a coin or a contact lens or a remote control or your iPhone. Verse 11, then he said, there was a certain man, he had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. And he divided them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, and he journeyed to a far country, and there he wasted his possessions with prodigal living. This is why we call this guy the prodigal son. Prodigal doesn't mean you left home. Prodigal means wasteful. The wasteful son. He wasted his possessions with prodigal living. And when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. He went and he joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine, and he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father and will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and he came to his father, and he was a way off. His father saw him and had compassion on him and ran and fell on him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be your son. The father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it. And let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive. He is lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now, his older brother was in the field. And he came near and drew near to the house. He heard music and he heard dancing. And so he called one of his servants and he asked him what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come home, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father's killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and he would not go in. And therefore the father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I've been serving you, and I never transgressed your commandment at any time. And yet you never gave me a goat that I might even make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours come, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you kill the fatted calf. And so he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and alive. He was lost and is found. Now he'll go on and talk about an unjust steward in the next part of this dialogue, but we'll stop here for today. Jesus is eating with these people. The scribes and the Pharisees look at them, they don't have any value. And you say, well, let me ask you a question. If you lost an animal, how would you behave? If you lost some stuff, how would you behave? There's a guy who had 2 kids. And one of the boys acted disreputably. Now, there's no way to make this younger kid a good kid. For all practical purposes, he walks up to his dad and says, I wish you were dead. I'd like my inheritance right now. Now, it wasn't unusual for them to do that. The younger brother would only get 1/3. The older brother would get 2/3. And so he's look, I'm not going to inherit the farm anyway, so let me cash out. I want to go. Well, not only is he rude to his father and impatient and he leaves home, he takes his money and he wastes his money. And he gets in such a terrible place that he's living with pigs. That's bad enough to live with pigs. But if you're a Jewish guy living with pigs, that's worse. And he's so hungry that he would eat what the pigs are eating. And I don't know the last time you looked at the pig's dinner menu. But you don't want it, okay? Because they'll eat anything. More people are killed in America by hogs than are killed by sharks. Okay? And if you ever wanted to get rid of a body, forget the wood chipper, it leaves DNA, put him in the hog pen. Just saying for those of you who are dating daughters. Anyway, so, and this kid's living with pigs. And then he kind of has this moment where he goes, there are slaves. There are servants at my father's house. And they have more bread than they eat. I'm starving to death. I think I'll crawl home with my pride and ask Dad if I can just be a servant. I quit being a son. I took my money. I got my inheritance. I left. I wasted that. I'll just go home and ask to be a slave. And he does. He heads home. And when he heads home, the father sees him. Jewish men didn't run because it involved raising their garments and you could see their lower legs. And they were very, very modest people. The father is pictured as running to meet this son, doing something very uncharacteristic for a pious Jewish man. And the father is pictured as running to meet this kid. And when he runs to meet him, he's got his speech. I've sinned against heaven. I've sinned against you. I can't be your son. And he said, bring me a ring, a robe, and shoes. Those are 3 signs of sonship. Slaves didn't wear shirts. Slaves didn't wear shoes. And when he gives him this ring, it's a signet ring. It's the debit card. You can go into town and make transactions, pour wax on it and mash it in there, and it's like signing a check. He gives this boy access to the checkbook after he's already spent his inheritance. Now we think the emphasis of this story is about either the lost boy or this loving father. Well, if that's the emphasis of the story ends here. But the story doesn't end here. I was in Cloverdale, Indiana, back when I was skinny and had hair. That's a long time ago, and was talking about this lesson. I said, who was unhappy when the prodigal son came home? A little girl about the 5th row said, the fatted calf. You are correct. Okay. But who else? This older brother. This is the value you place on a lost animal. This is the value you placed on a lost contact, a lost coin, a lost cell phone. And this older brother is a picture of you and the value you place on lost people. You are so mad and so pious and so self-righteous that you won't even go celebrate that this kid's not dead. And then you have this attitude, I've never sinned against you. Really? When did we get the idea that when we see people out here who are in trouble and having difficulties, that somehow they're so different than us? And that we're at home with the Father and we've never ever sinned. And this guy, he's comparing, you've never even given me a goat. Oh yeah, where do you live rent-free? What are you about to inherit? And yet we tend to look at what we don't have rather than what we do have. And we look at the things that people do that displease. And this older brother, he's at the house. He's not really at home. Because he and the Father are at odds with the way they feel about lost people. And so when Jesus tells these stories, it's an indictment. It's not the same story about lost things. It's not coins and sheep and people. It's this is how you feel about an animal. And this is how you feel about stuff. And this is how you're acting about these lost people. Now compare how you're acting about lost people and how the Father acted about lost people. And if it's not the same, that's an indictment. The Father doesn't worry about what the boy has done. He puts it all in. He was lost. He is found. He was dead. He is alive. And the brother is still stuck in, well, he devoured your money with harlots. The story doesn't tell us that he did that. That's the brother's indictment. How many times have we superimposed bad behavior on people? So the story that Jesus tells his audience is, you've devalued these people. Well, let me confront you. This is the value you place on an animal. This is the value you place on a thing. And this is the value you place on a lost person. Shame on you. And then, this is the value your Father places on lost things. And for our purposes today, there's two things we've got to talk about. Number one, if you're not a lost thing, you need to put value on things that are lost. Are your neighbors lost? Are your friends lost? Do the people you go to school with lost? Are your friends on Facebook lost? Are the people on your team lost? Are the people at your company lost? And are you there looking for them, or are you there just to do the thing you do at where you are doing the thing you do? No, I'm at my job to make money. So the money you make at your job is more important than the lost people at your job. Well, I'm at my school to make grades. So the grades you're there are more important than the lost people at your school. See, it's a value lesson for us as well. Why are you where you're at? Why are you doing what you're doing? Or is our value system about money and things and not about people? So if you're not lost, your value system needs to be the same as your Father's. And if it's not, you're at odds with your Father. And if you disagree with your Father, are you not yourself lost? Second question is, if you are lost, it doesn't matter what people think about you. What does your Father view you like? How does the Father view lost things? How many of us end up in a pig pen situation and go, I'm not even worthy to call my dad anymore. I'm not even worthy to go home. I just need to eat with the pigs or sleep with the servants. I'm just not worthy. And the Father says, no. My value for you is if you'll come home, you'll be a son again. My value for you is in your mind you quit being a son, but you never really quit being my son. You're a lost son, you're a disobedient son, you're an erring son, but you come home to me and I'll give you a ring, a robe, and shoes. God doesn't have second-tier children. God doesn't have any grandchildren. God doesn't have any stepchildren. We're all children. We all have the same status. And when you've made a mistake and you've done something wrong and you haven't lived like you're supposed to live, the Father says, this is the value I place on lost people. I sent my son to eat with them. I sent my son to fellowship with them. I sent my son to die for them. And if we think in terms of them versus us, our value system is probably wrong, because we're all lost children. Some of us have been privileged to be saved and baptized and try to live faithful. But if you're lost, this is how the Father feels about you. And if you're not lost, this is how the Father wants you to feel about those who are lost. So as we wrap up today, let me ask you two questions. Question number one, are you valuing the lost in the same way that your Father is? And if not, you should be. Question number two, if you are lost, God has an invitation. He's waiting to see you head toward home. And when you head toward home, He'll run to meet you. Won't you head toward home this morning while we stand, while we sing?